Ladies and gentlemen, I'm super excited for today's conversation. We get to dive into all things leadership. I'm joined today, Michael DeLisser. Did I do it right?
You did.
Off camera, I was panicking about the last name, and it's such an easy one, but you know when you overthink something.
I get it.
Michael DeLisser.
Yep.
For everybody listening, Michael and I met recently at a conference and got to chat, and I was like, I need to have you on my podcast. He's got over 20 years of experience in leadership coaching and consulting, and this great background. You also have a lot of experience when you were teaching in the MBA program at the University of Utah. And I wrote down some stuff here that I just think is cool. But at least till now, 3,000 leaders that you've trained, 500 executives that you've coached, and you've helped over 50 senior leadership positions with their strategic planning and all of this stuff. And for everybody listening off camera, Michael and I feel like we were already kind of podcasting, diving into it and learning all of these things. But before I dive straight into, some of the leadership components, and by the way, a little bit of a personal endeavor on my end today to learn from you as much as I can on leadership. But before we do, I'd love to hear your background and a little bit of your journey to what, and you're also a business owner. I failed to mention that.
Right.
I'm going to butcher it. DeLisser Consulting, I think is the name. Or
DeLisser
coaching.
Leadership Consulting.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Check out their website. Shameless plug. But I would love to hear how you got there, because I know that somebody doesn't just start a leadership and consulting firm without a whole lot of experience in leadership and consulting. So do you mind humoring me and walking me through sort of the career path and your own kind of growth journey that brought you to where you are right now?
Sure. I'd be glad to. It's interesting. I kind of got started. It was a false start, but it was a start. When I was 15 years old, my dad had he worked in a executive outplacement firm. And he was teaching executives that had been fired how to get new jobs. And he was specifically coaching them in the communication skills that got them fired, right? And at age 15, I was able to sit in and watch him do one-on-one coaching sessions with it was incredible. And
what a crazy niche for him anyway, by the way.
Yeah.
Executives that have been fired that need to get a new job.
Well, his route there is even more bizarre because he was a football coach at Williams College and Columbia University. Then he got into recruiting because he had done that, and then next thing you know, somehow he gets into a role where he's now an executive outplacement. He had never done it before either, but he saw the opportunity. And so in any case, I'm sitting in there at 15 years old watching him coach, and I'll never forget the first one. It was a senior executive of a finance department in a Fortune 100, company. And he was teaching him basic listening skills, like just fundamental listening skills. And I was kind of fascinated in that this guy even needed this kind of coaching, right? Because he was obviously very successful in his career. But what I realized, and this was afterwards, my dad said, "So what'd you think?" And I said, "I was kind of surprised at the stuff you were teaching him. And maybe I was taking for granted the stuff I was learning having my dad who teaches this kind of stuff. And that's where I learned for the first time about the Peter Principle. And you're probably familiar with the term, but for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that means, it essentially means people get promoted to their highest level of incompetence. Not competence, incompetence. And I'll give you an example of how that works. So typically, you have a person think about the first time you ever get promoted, right? Who gets promoted out of everyone on the team? The person who's technically best at what they do.
Right.
So they reward them by taking them away from their technical jobs and put them in a role where they're a completely different set of skills, which is, leading others.
Right.
And so what companies do is they promote people and keep promoting them, but they don't give them the communication skills training along the way. So eventually their careers come to a halt because their communication skills catch up with them, or their lack of communication skills. So I learned about that then, and I was excited, to realize that, well, I wasn't excited at the time, but at the time I was fascinated by it. And then when I went to before I went to college, my primary identity in high school was athlete and social butterfly, right? I mean, I wanted to be liked and I wanted to be an athlete. And 3 consecutive years, I broke bones in my body playing football, and my it was getting clear that my body was not built to play sport, at least contact sports.
Come on, we're built the same. Same haircut, same build. You know, it's funny. We would have gotten along just fine in high school because I had very similar priorities. That's all I'll say. Until I learned that this isn't cut out for, for college football.
Well, sophomore year, tore the ligaments in my ankle. Junior year, broke my thumb. Senior year, broke my ankle.
Jeez.
And literally my senior year, the team was actually having bets on when I would get hurt. It was a starting kickoff of the first game. I caught the kickoff. I planted my foot. I stepped, and my ankle broke.
And done.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So in any case, that's the more detail than I intended. But I got to University of Rhode Island hoping to play football, and I watched these guys first day of practice walking out there. Every one of them was like 300 pounds and 6 foot whatever. And I just realized there's no way. You know, my football career is over.
It's over. Right? Yeah.
So then I'm at college, and I was partying for the first year. I really didn't do much of anything. And my dad had he had my two brothers before me kind of broke him in, but he learned that you have to be held accountable for what you do. And I was just screwing around, and I wasn't doing well, and I was getting B- average or whatever. And he said, look, if you want to go away to school, you need to be accountable and do well, or else you can just go locally. You know? So that was the first time in my life I actually applied my brain, really. You know, up until that point, I was not that interested. But the first semester that I did that, I actually got almost straight A's.
Wow.
One A minus. And that's the first time in my life I realized I was smart. And the first time, I was going through this identity crisis, because I was always the athlete and the popular, or trying to be popular anyway. And now the first time in my life, I'm in a place where no one knows who I am, and I can't be an athlete.
Now you're a little fish in a big pond.
Yeah. So, but then I started getting excited because I didn't know that I was smart for the most part. And and then from that point forward, my grades were doing great. And then I just started getting excited about, more and more about communication skills training. My degree was in communication. And then I came back and I tried a couple other jobs. I tried a sales job. I worked for an advertising agency in Manhattan, and neither of those worked out. And everything kept gravitating back to what my dad was doing. It was the only thing I really kind of had a passion around doing. And so I went and got a master's degree in organizational communication and intercultural communication. And it just kept going from there. My first job out of the master's degree was with a consulting firm, and they were letting me custom design and build and deliver leadership development programs and communication skills programs, and it just kept going. So it's been a fun path, but it was a little bit, I think everybody, when they're either at the high school or college level, or when they're trying to figure out what they want to do, you have to figure out what you don't love before you discover what you do.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened with me. And eventually I really got excited about it.
Yeah. And then dove in and doubled down on the formal education of it, which is really cool. What especially is interesting to me about that is intercultural communication. Mm-hmm. I think that's fascinating. I think it's pretty straightforward to consider interdepartmental communication and organizational communication and things like that. I had a feeling we would, talk about things like that.
Yeah.
Never did the idea of the complexities of intercultural communication cross my mind. I think that would be so fascinating to study how, because now we're in this world where cultures are in, we all work together and live together, and it's this amazing kind of, collision of all these beautiful cultures and stuff.
Yeah.
But who would have thought that also presents communication challenges, not just language barrier, but like true communication challenges. I'm curious, again, from the intercultural perspective, I would love to hear significant takeaways, or, the thing that nobody thinks about from, how to communicate interculturally. That's fascinating that's even a field of study.
Yeah. Oh, and it's desperately needed too. As the world becomes more global, more and more, if you can't, operate well with people from very different backgrounds and intercultural, whether it be within the United States, the different cultural groups versus externally.
Yeah.
If you cannot do that in today's business, you're going to struggle.
Right.
Yeah. And part of that passion started when I was an undergraduate. I took an intercultural communication class, and there was a professor there I just absolutely loved, Dr. Agnes Studi. I don't know if she's still around anymore, but she taught this class on intercultural communication, she got me excited about it. I mean, she started talking about how, and we learned a lot about different cultures around the world and how different cultures view things good or bad. And, good or bad is a completely human construct, right? We decide what's good or bad based on our experiences. But so I got excited there. And then in my graduate degree, my advisor was our VP of intercultural communication at the university, or I believe it was a VP. I don't remember her exact title, but I was working at a hotel that was going through a merger, and my work was I went in and I analyzed the first meetings they had with the company that they had acquired, and what was fascinating is the study didn't start as intercultural, but it turned into it, because what we realized was I was looking at who heard what messaging and what point, in this, and the company that was buying the other one, or DoubleTree, was the one that was buying it. So, there's all these cultural messages about their cookies and things like that. But long story short, what I discovered in the research was that the Latino employees were getting the messaging differently than the employees that were just English speaking, first language. There was a huge Bosnian population that worked at the hotel as well. There was like 50 of them there, and they were getting the messages differently again. And the hotel had no idea that this was happening, right? Because each group had its own way of absorbing and learning the information. So it started to evolve into this opportunity to recognize that we have other ways of communicating with our employees in these kind of sub networks and these.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really interesting. But I didn't know that it was going to go down that road, but it was the single most interesting thing about, during a merger and acquisition, people are thinking just two companies coming together. No, you have a whole bunch of subcultures going on.
Right.
And you have to understand, if you don't manage the messaging and how it gets to them and use, the thought leaders within their own groups to help do the messaging, then the messages will be heard differently and responded to differently.
Yeah. Wow. And what an interesting concept to consider too, the idea of, obviously, communication is a two-way street.
Sure.
I think we all know that, right?
Yeah.
Somebody sends the message, somebody receives the message. In fact, we were even talking off camera, some of your experience in the past of receiving criticism and how that, was delivered and received. But that makes me curious. Safe to assume then that in that case, and probably in many cases, the messaging being delivered is consistent. And whether it's email or call or however it's delivered, it doesn't matter. But the message was the same across all the cultures in this case, or wherever it might be. Walk me through how that's similar or dissimilar to people as well, with different personalities. Because I think that it's kind of interesting. I just had Dr. Candice Jeep on, and she's a doctor of audiology. It was such a fun conversation because here I am thinking we're going to talk about like the science of hearing, but we talked about the fact that communication is the foundation of all human relationships. And it was so eye-opening for me of how important, verbal and hearing is in that context, but how important communication is obviously for all of us nowadays. I would love to hear, help me unpack that the message can be delivered the same, but the receiving of the message can vary based on who you're talking to. Help me understand that a little
dramatically. Bit. And I'll give you an example. In this merger and acquisition that was happening, there was this thing that the hotel did. They give everyone a chocolate chip cookie and it's warmed, right? That's what DoubleTree has been known for years. And they give that to people. And in the kickoff of this merger, the CEO of the company got on screen and he told the story of when he was a kid, his mother would make cookies when they moved to a neighborhood, people in the neighborhood gave them cookies and welcomed them. And he wanted to keep that messaging going, welcome to, our family or whatever it was. And I'll give you an example, the Bosnian employees, right? That didn't resonate with them as in that way, because the sweet cookie is not what you get. In Bosnia, I believe it was a type of salted bread or something that was similar.
But the gesture resonated?
The gesture resonated, but when they were sharing it with each other, it turned into their personal story of what they did in their culture. So it did resonate, but it was turned into their experience, right? And similar things happened in terms of even how they were getting the messaging. Everyone was in the same meeting, but for a lot of the Latino employees or the Bosnians who were English second language, they didn't necessarily absorb all the messaging there. They counted on their peers to give them the messaging later. So there was a second kind of layer in there of people filtering the messaging and sharing it with them because they didn't have English as a first language.
Right.
And again, most companies that go through transitions like that aren't thinking, is everybody receiving the message the same way? Do we need to think about having different messaging methods for different groups or subgroups within the organization? And then on top of that, everyone has personality differences that causes them to hear things differently as well.
Right.
If you're more of a structured person, you need that kind of linear, laid out in a logical way. If you're more of a result-driven person, you just want to get the bottom line given to you. You don't want all the details. And so it gets so complicated. There's so many different layers you have to unpack when you're thinking about creating messaging in a multicultural environment.
Oh my gosh, that is so eye-opening and fascinating. So I come from a seat, and speaking about leadership, I've always kind of been, I've always been a natural leader. Mm-hmm.
I sensed that about you the first time I met you.
Yeah. But until very recently, I haven't been intentional about it. I've always kind of just trusted my instinct and trusted my gut and, been the leader, which I've learned in hindsight now has not necessarily always been the best approach to leadership.
Yeah.
And now that I own my own company and, I'm the leader, I don't have somebody I get to turn to and ask for advice. And my dad's my advisory board, and he always jokes that, you get what you pay for. So I get what I pay for there. But jokes aside, it's something that I've been taking very seriously because while I am, the leader and wearing that hat, I very genuinely care about the people and my clients and my employees and my contractors and whatever it might be. And I've definitely had times when I've been at home scratching my head, wondering how did they not get it? Even though it came from a place of really good intention, I think definitely have made mistakes in terms of how I've delivered messages. And so it's so fascinating to hear that even with the right intentions, even if it is a warm cookie, which that resonates with me perfectly, these different groups, and then you layer in different cultures, different personality types, how complicated leadership communication can become. So I'm kind of curious, and I know there's not a magic wand or kind of the one size fits all, but from your experience, when it comes to a leader communicating important things to the company, whether it's changes or financial updates or new initiatives or whatever it might be, knowing that their intention is to have everybody bought in on, what I'm getting at is where I think I've struggled is that I have a very clear vision for where we're headed. I've had a very hard time communicating the vision properly. Mm-hmm. Because I'm looking 6 months ahead.
Sure.
I'm an optimist at a fault. And so anyway, I'm curious from your experience, best practices or lessons learned in terms of how leaders can better communicate, to their company for this context. And I know that that's a very loaded question. I know that.
Yeah, and I'll add another dimension that you wouldn't even think would be something you have to think about. But this is one of the mistakes that I made early in my career that haunts me to this day. But education level, right? I was at a company where I was delivering training to supervisors, right? These were all supervisors. And it happened to be a company where they worked day shifts and night shifts, and they did 10-hour days. And then they had me do the training the 11th and 12th hour of a day. So I had a tired audience, and I was trying to keep them active and moving around. So I thought I did this simple little activity. Instead of me reading out everything, I was going to have everyone go around the room and read one thing. We get about halfway around the room, and one of the supervisors says, "Pass." And I don't know why, but I respected that, and we kept going. Then he didn't show up for the next 2 training sessions. And I went to his manager. I said, what happened? He couldn't read. I was asking him to read something in front of all of his peers, and I had no idea.
Right.
I assumed he was a supervisor, but all their product SKUs were numbers. He was a great supervisor, and he knew the numbers of all their products, but he couldn't read. So I had embarrassed this guy in front of his peers because I did not know my audience. So going back to your question, you have to know your audience. You have to know all that. There's this great tool called diversity wheel. It's by Marilyn Loden is her name. And it talks about all the different layers of diversity. There's like 8 or 9 categories that people are usually are part of their primary identity. That would be some of the protected classes or, might be religion, things like that.
Our core stuff.
Yeah, core stuff. And then there's all these other ones, which would include educational background and, others. And if you stop and think about your audience, you can't possibly understand who your audience is by yourself without involving other people. And so if you have messaging you're going to put across, you have to make sure you get people with different backgrounds from you looking at it and stopping you from making mistakes. Another great example, I was with another company. They were trying to reach out to a market that that was underserved in general with healthcare, and it was a Latino market. And they were trying to put messaging out there, and they were going to have their English speakers just do conversions into Spanish and get them. And we had one really good leader in the organization. He's like, no, you do not do that, because that's what everyone else tries to do. And what you're demonstrating is you don't know our culture and you don't know, you're not embedded. So the ultimate plan was we went out and made ourselves known in their community. We offered services to them. We got to know them, and we let people who were from the community help create the messaging.
Yeah.
And that's when it really resonated, because they realized we were there not just to try to make money off them. We were there to serve their community better, to allow them to have better health care.
How interesting.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense. It's there's a marketing concept of, people like us do things like that. But people are so desperately wanting to be a part of we talked about it at the conference, actually, be a part of a community.
Sure.
And feel real connection. I've noticed it now that I'm a business owner and I meet with other business owners, for marketing, we talk at a totally different level now.
Sure.
Versus when I was an employee of a company trying to relate, and I had no clue the struggles and, just kind of the nuance that goes on with that context. That makes so much sense. And talking about, kind of the idea of taking the time to learn your audience, and then how valuable that is to tweak your messaging. And in this case, of course not. Let's not just translate it straight across. We'll kind of, do it in a more authentic way, I think is super powerful.
Well, and you and I also talked about personality differences, right? And so one of the things I do every time I put together a presentation, I know what my most dominant personality is and my least dominant, right? And my most dominant is a people person. So I'm pretty good with just interacting with people. My least dominant is structure. And I suck at structure, right? In my whole life, it's kind of been holding me back to the degree I allow it to, right? So
what's structure?
Right. So what I do is my preparation for every training I create the training, then I stop, and the 2 lesser dominant ones that I have is results driven and structure driven. I go through and I analyze all my content from a results-driven personality, and I start slashing things because I know that I'm going to want to give too much information, right, for a results-driven person. I also go through and say, does it logically flow? Because that's what the structure person will get frustrated if you start jumping around and you don't lead them down a path that's logical, right? And these are all stereotypes, but when we're all a mixture of all the personality types. But what I do is I go specifically and look at my content for the ones that I'm weakest in, and I try to make up for that so that I can make it more appealing to audiences that have different personality types from me.
In your experience, knowing that you've worked with hundreds of leaders and supervisors, and and I'm really, what I'm interested in is C-suite executive level leadership.
Sure.
Do you find is there commonalities in terms of personality traits that get people to there, or does it vary just as wide as any other sample of people?
I would say, I've done a lot of personality assessments of leadership teams over the years. You may find in general that there is more results-driven people that get there, but that doesn't mean they'll be successful there, right? And so what I mean by that is because they're driven and they're focused on getting results, they get noticed for the results. But that same drive can also be what gets them into trouble in their careers when they're being too blunt and they're not being people person oriented. So I would say that I don't think there's a recipe for success at the executive level other than knowing what you lead with, what your most dominant personality is, knowing what your weakest one is, and focusing your energy on on minimizing the impact of your weakest one and noticing, how to leverage your strong personality, whatever you lead with, and or tone it down in environments where that's not who your audience is. So it really comes down to knowing yourself, but also being able to read the room and know whether or not they need some different type of energy out of you right now because you're not connecting with them.
So would it be fair to assume then that, because you'd mentioned, that we're all a mix of these different personality traits, which obviously I know is true. Is it a safe assumption then to say that anybody can be a leader? Let me rephrase the question. Is leadership someone you are or something you can learn?
I would say it's both, right? I mean, you have to have the drive and interest. But let's talk about what we even mean by leader, right? Anyone can be a leader in your organization without having a title, right? And that's the most important thing to me. I mean, I've seen entire movements in organizations that have come out of one individual's ideas, right? That didn't have a leadership, but they chose to step up at that moment. And so one of the kind of lessons that I've learned over the years is you have to assume everyone in the room is capable of leading at any given time, and you have to give them the opportunities to lead in order for them to, when you are one of the you asked earlier about, how do you get the message to resonate with people as a senior leader? If you can connect people to purpose, it makes such a big difference. So, example, there was a CEO of a lab testing company that I was working with. He was in the physicians program at that I taught at the University of Utah. He was putting together his kind of yearly strategic planning presentation. And he wanted to make people feel like they were connected to the mission of the organization. And he ended up in this presentation that he was working on in our class, putting together a presentation, a story. He added a story to it. And storytelling is one of the best ways to help people connect. I mean, if you get really good at that. His story was so powerful. It was a true story about a patient that, and again, they just did the lab testing there, but this person had tested positive for a cancer. So they brought him in and said, look, you did test positive for this. It's really important that you get the rest of your family to get screened because this is a genetic cancer. So he gets the rest of the family to get screened. They catch all of them early enough that they can do something about it. And then one day the entire family walks into his office. He has no idea why. And he's sitting there behind his desk, and he's like, he didn't know if he was in trouble. He didn't know. And the whole family came to thank him.
Wow. Because
of the difference they made for catching it early. So he told that story in his presentation to the whole organization. And what he said to them was, every one of you, you are not a blood tester. You are not a this. You are a person that helps save lives. And I still get chills when I tell that story, because if I was in that organization, I would be stoked, because it doesn't matter what role you did. One way or another, you contributed to saving the lives of other people by doing your role. And that's the kind of thing that connects people to purpose. So when you can have really good examples, whether it be a story, whether it be helping connect the dots for your teams, anytime you're doing something strategic, you have to help people see how they personally are tied to that organizational mission and or how they personally are helping the organization achieve their purpose. That also intrinsically allows people to feel like they have an opportunity to meet their own purposes more often than not.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book called Greatness by David Cook, Dr. David Cook?
I have not.
Add it to your list.
Okay.
I'm about halfway through it, so I'm probably going to butcher this, and I'm sure he's listening. But they talk about direction, purpose, and then there's a third pillar to it. But it's basically that I swear that story could have been plucked out of the book about how cool, like where you're headed as an organization, and then getting people. The point is that the purpose is the fuel.
Yeah.
That drives it all. And then, you have to have mental toughness and all of these other things to kind of weigh through it. But that idea of purpose is so powerful. And I think that's one of the things from an entrepreneur, at least, is challenging is we have different goals than the employees. We're building a business or trying to do these things where they have their own personal goals and different metrics of success, and are we climbing the ladder, or do we get fulfillment from recognition or money or whatever it might be? And that's one of those complexities that I found where simultaneously you have to have all of these people with different goals and values and priorities aligned though in the same purpose, which I think is how interesting to hear that idea of using storytelling because what that did in my mind is reframed, he's not standing up saying how good Q2 profits were. He's saying we save lives.
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody that wouldn't resonate with, at least normal people.
And look, not all of us have jobs where we could say we're saving lives, but there are connections you can make. And more often than not, we fail to do that as senior leaders, is we fail to stop and think, how is this? We think from a standpoint of what do I want to present to my team? I want them to know the vision. I want them to know our strategies. But that in itself doesn't make an employee feel like they're connected to it. Now, when you take the extra steps of giving examples, of adding stories, of talking about how individual departments are contributing to hitting that, that's when it really starts to resonate. To your other point there about personal purpose, right? Personal purpose is not always going to be the same as the organizational purpose. And which, by the way, post-pandemic, the entire world has shifted towards I want meaningful work, right, and I want to live a purpose, right? And more often than not, I've put programs in place in organizations that help them connect to their own purpose because a lot of people haven't even done that work for themselves. They haven't had the chance to really stop and say, what is my purpose? So
individually, you mean?
Yeah, individually. Yeah. So one of the things that I always encourage every senior leader to do, or leader at any level, is to learn very early what are the things that your employees are most passionate about and what are they best at skill-wise. Because, and this goes back to, if we're going to drop books, right? Good to great, right? And I love the hedgehog concept in that. It's three things that the companies that made the jump from good to great did three things really well. One, they stayed close to what they were best in the world at, right? Where they were really skilled. Second, they followed what they were passionate about. And the third one is they, made sure that they did something to make sure their financial engine was running, right? So my argument is you do the first two really well. You give people a chance to use their strengths and do what they're passionate about. The third one will happen on its own. And so if you know as a manager or an employee that a person has a passion and a skill and their current role is not giving them the chance to do it, you can create opportunities to let them stretch outside that role and give them a chance to do more and more of those things. That's what's going to get people loyal to the organization because they know you're committed to their development, that you know that you've taken the time to learn what their passion is and what their strengths are, and that you are doing things to make them have a chance to do it on a daily basis.
Does that apply outside of work, or is that within the confines of, the professional realm? When you say from a leader, learning what people are personally passionate about and skilled about and things like that, help me define that a little bit more. Is that within, from a job role perspective, or is that what makes you tick outside of work, all of the above?
It includes both. It includes both because it's so interesting. There are things that if you know about your employees, you can find ways to better accommodate them in different ways, right? So it may be something that has nothing to do with work that you know about them, but just that they have a hobby or they love a certain type of music or you knew they were going to a concert, just taking an interest in what they did and actually asking them about it, genuine interest, not just doing a technique.
Yeah, caveat to all this, you have to actually care.
Yeah, you do have to care. And I've worked with an executive who literally opened the coaching by saying, this was actually a professor, and he basically said to me, I'm having a problem because I don't have any of these students that want to work with me. And I said, we started talking about it, and he said, but I don't care what they think, I don't care. I just, and I was like, well, look at the outcome of what you're getting here. They don't want to work with you because they're sensing that you don't care. So what can you do in your approach that shows that you do care? What do you have to do in your own brain to make you want to care? Because for your success, you have to have students that need to help you with the research. And if you're not showing an interest in them, they're not going to show an interest in your research. Right. It all comes around. So I helped him come connected to that by making him realize his own success is determined by his ability to get people interested in wanting to work with him, right?
So I'm curious, because we've talked about, different communication styles, different abilities to receive messaging and, things like that. One of the things that I'm interested in your perspective on, I've always been the type of guy that just, at the end of the day, I lean into intuition and my emotional intelligence, and that has served me well. But I have a strong capacity for it. It's been a blessing of mine that I can read a room well. And what I'm curious about is, I'm curious about how intent plays into the tactics of messaging and communication, meaning that if there's a leader or somebody who's maybe not delivering messaging properly, or it's for this group and it's being delivered to that group, or there's all these like tactical issues in the way that a message is conveyed. For the normal population, or for most people, how much of a role does intent play into it? Can most people tell, like, okay, that wasn't delivered well, but I understand that they care and that they meant well by it? Or when we're talking about communication, is it like, nobody can sense your intention? You really have to learn how to communicate properly. It doesn't carry as much weight?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of things. The first thing I'll tell you is one of the things that I taught, and this is something I watched my dad teach this, 30 plus years ago, and I still teach it to this day, but we all have these habits. Self-awareness is key to begin with, right? You have to know how you're coming across to others, and the less aware you are, the more likely you're going to do exactly what you just said, which is people are going to feel your intent isn't true, or you're not really, there. But having a self-awareness about how you come across to others is really important. We all have habits we develop, throughout our careers. This is another thing that I've been teaching for years, is becoming aware of what your habits are and then finding ways to replace those.
Yeah.
If your habit is interrupting people, is thinking of questions to ask and not listening, judging people, more often than not, other people can see that that's happening in your brain, right? Even if you're faking attention. And this, I get a laugh out of this whenever I do this in a class, because I literally get people to go out and assess themselves on their most common habits, and they come back and tell me which ones it is that they do the most. And then I ask them, well, when someone else is faking attention with you, can you tell? And they're like, oh, yeah, we could tell. So when you're faking attention with them, do you think they can tell as well? And you can see like the light bulb go on. They're like, holy crap, I just realized like everything that I'm doing, they all are noticing.
Obvious. Yeah.
So
now I'm being like hyper aware of how I'm hosting, by the way. So thank you for that.
Well, I didn't think you were faking attention. So I think you're saying the right things.
Balancing a true intention and thinking of the next question, which is actually kind of difficult. But anyway.
Yeah, and which, by the way, that's not unhealthy to think of the next question. But the challenge becomes what we typically do. And I just did this when I presented at the Southwest Small Business Conference. I did this exercise on multitasking, right? And the message you're sending to someone else, if you're checking your texts or if you're, responding to an email while they're in the meeting with you, is you're not important enough for my full attention. And when you send that message, and you do it often enough, people just start to not believe what you're saying or not think you really care. And that's not a great message to be sending. So the degree to which you could be 100% engaged, and this is one of the things I teach people, how do you shut down the voice in your head to slow down to get yourself to the same speed as the other person, because your brain can work a lot faster than how other people speak. The average person speaks about 150 words per minute. Our brains can go on to up to 750 words per minute. So you have this kind of 600 word per minute gap in your brain where, you could be listening to everything I'm saying, but at the same time, be wondering why I'm doing all these stupid actions. So it's one of those things you need to get good at. It's slowing your brain down to be 100% present. When you do that, people will pick up on your intention, because your intention is to absorb what they're saying and take them serious.
Which ties in, and I was going to ask you about it. I believe you even have verbiage on your website that talks to this idea of helping people unlearn the habits that have held them back from success. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with this intention idea, because communications, we've touched on 30 variables. It is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And, you talk about habits, communication, and then, generational norms and household norms and cultural norms and these things that we've already touched on.
Sure.
Learning new communication styles, I would imagine, has a very steep learning curve. And that's, I guess, and maybe it ties into kind of that idea of if people understand that you're at least trying, it's okay to not be perfect at it. Because I'm curious, which is leading to my question, this idea of unlearning habits, that have kind of held you back from success. I'd imagine communication is at the top of that list, if not, amongst the list for sure with most people. What are some of the other habits, or is it usually kind of communication and leadership type habits that have held people back?
It's mostly communication.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at why mergers and acquisitions fail, they have a great plan, but the people management side of it
breaks down.
Yeah. And you could go same thing, when people end up going back to what my father used to do, the reason those executives were in outplacement because they did something communication related that they sent an email, an angry email. They said the wrong thing in the meeting in front of other people. They did, whatever. But I would say that more often than not, communication will hold back people's careers and or cause the career to derail more than their technical skills. The other part of that is there are sometimes other habits that aren't necessarily, they show up in communication, but they're deeper than that. For example, when a lot of the times when I'm doing personality assessments and I'm talking through people, there's different things that impact how our personalities come across. One is kind of how, you're wired, and you could see young kids at a very young age showing different types of personality traits.
Yeah.
But
I
your
have
life,
3 of them.
Yeah. But your life experiences and your role models are huge impact, right? So I've seen situations where a leader needed to work on their communication skills, but it was primarily with females because, and we came to this conclusion together after working with him. His household growing up, his father was very disrespectful in the way he spoke to his mother. And, we carry that crap into the workplace.
Yes, yeah.
Every if you live in a family where you interrupted each other because there was a bunch of kids and the only way to get heard was to interrupt, that doesn't work in the workplace. You can't just be interrupting all the time to get attention, but it's already programmed in our brains. And more than once, I've had a situation where someone had to realize and learn that they were treating women differently at work than they were men. And they had no idea they were doing it. They were just doing what they had done their whole lives,
right.
And it's a horrifying realization when they get to that point. But, one example, I was coaching a female executive, and she was the only female on an all-male team. And there was one leader that kept, giving her a hard time every set. He was, teasing her and making fun of her every meeting. And she had talked to him on the side, and he had not stopped. And he just kept doing it. So I was coaching her through what should I do? I mean, this isn't right. And I said, the long and short of it was, she called out his behavior in the next meeting, but not in a threatening way. She just said, look, I have a question for you right after he made another comment. She said, you just made this comment to me. Last meeting, you made that comment to me. The meeting before, you made that comment to me. And my question for you is, why are you only doing that to me? Is it because I'm the only woman in the room? I mean, what's going on? And she just asked a question. He never did it again. And afterwards, he came up to her and apologized.
I bet.
Right? But he turned deep red when he did it. But after trying behind closed doors, she tried a non-threatening.
A different tactic.
All she did was point out facts. And everyone in the room suddenly was dialed in on whether or not this guy was going to take shots at her.
And that message was received.
Yeah. So, but again, that was a learned
bad
behavior that he got somewhere along the line, and he was only doing it to the female in the room. So
Right.
those are the kind of things that go beyond communication skills, but they still come out in communication.
Yeah.
So that's why it all circles back to communication.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you touched on it earlier. The timing of it's fascinating. I was talking with Chase. You met him. He's one of our account executives. He's a great guy. We were talking today at work of just more bantering, but about, I don't know if it's encouraging or discouraging to see some of the type of people that have some of these roles, the executive level roles. And you're like, how in the world, did they get there? And it sounds like I think it's encouraging to hear from you say that when it comes to leadership trajectory, your communication skills are arguably more important than your technical skills. The thing you do, the way you communicate it carries more weight than the thing you do, which is so.
Let me clarify that a little bit, because in certain roles that are highly technical, that may not be true. But in terms of leadership roles, the higher you go in an organization, the more you're going to get pulled away from the technical work and more into your success will be about how you lead others to be better at what they do.
Right.
And that's where, so the higher you go, the more critical communication skills become for your success.
Which is so, I've always thought, I don't know, there's this kind of idea of, I'm a big believer in vulnerability and authenticity and things like that.
Yeah.
And, being the leader is terrifying. And I'm way more, it's weird, simultaneously right now, I have the most confidence I've ever had in my life. My self-confidence is at the highest. So is my insecurity. Like I am so painfully aware of how little I actually know now.
Yeah.
I've got enough life experience to be confident that I can solve the problems and that, I can withstand this storm. And, I've kind of stacked some evidence to at least my confidence is there enough. But it's a weird kind of dichotomy that it's happened simultaneously for me where I'm also, though, the most insecure I've ever been. Like, about leadership and management and decision making and whatever it might be. It's like this, you realize how inadequate you are. And then you start to see all of these great leaders that have coaches and, mentors. And it's just an interesting conflicting reality because the appearance of a leader is calm, cool, collected. They've got it all figured out. That's why they're the leader, right? When the leader doesn't, they don't know what they're doing either. We're all doing the best we can trying to figure this out here. So I'm curious your advice to leaders on how they balance that, because I have a belief that if I'm vulnerable and if I'm authentic, it allows me to connect with people in a deeper way, which helps me lead better. I also, though, need to present myself as the strong, confident leader that I am. The two things are happening in very real ways simultaneously.
Yeah.
How in the world do you balance that as a leader? What's your advice?
Well, the first thing I'll say is every executive that might be listening to this has probably felt the same way you just described, right? There's nothing unusual about feeling very confident and very insecure at the same time. Particularly look at the world, how fast the world is changing, right? AI is changing how everything's happening. The changes are coming faster. They're exponential. They're not, and so there's that whole fake it till you make it kind of mindset, but you present yourself the best you can as together, but underneath every leader has insecurities. I can't tell you how many senior executives I've coached in presentation skills where they've opened up and talked to me about how, and a lot of the judgments that they're feeling about themselves go back to childhood stuff sometimes, right? I mean, always feeling like you're going to be judged. Well, that little voice in their head is usually the voice of a critic from their childhood or somewhere along their line, their career, And so the insecurities are always there. And one of the things I always say, just with presentation skills, is your goal is not to give the perfect presentation. In fact, if you set that standard for yourself, you're always going to fail.
Yeah.
Because in my lifetime, I've given thousands of presentations. I've never given a perfect one. And sometimes it has nothing to do with you. It might be someone's phone went off. I was in an executive.
The clicker didn't work.
I was in an executive meeting facilitating with 15 executives at the University of Utah hospitals and clinics. All of their beepers went off and they all just ran out of the room and left me standing there. I mean, what do you do with that? And then it turned out there was like a code that happened and they all had to respond to it, but it ended up being okay and they all came back. But I had to gather myself together again because all of a sudden everyone just got up and left and no one explained to me what was going on, right? So those things are always going to happen. And you have to be okay with that discomfort because that discomfort will never – it's actually a good thing because if there's a nervousness, it's going to keep you on your toes. You just have to learn how to manage it.
Yeah.
So
it's okay to be – it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be insecure. Mm-hmm. Just have to learn how to balance it is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. And which, by the way, I mean, a lot of that goes back to a lot of what I teach is based in emotional intelligence, right? It's understanding what triggers you, understanding, having self-awareness, but then also being able to manage those insecurities and starting to understand that more often than not, that voice inside your head is not your own. It's a voice from your past. And the degree to which you become aware of that, you can start telling the voice to shut the hell up, because it's, and then you have to have something to replace it with. So anytime I train any executive in any skill, you have to you go through a stage of 1, becoming aware of what you do, 2, getting good at catching yourself doing it, and 3, having an alternative behavior to replace it with. And if you could do those 3 things in that order,
the third.
The third is what people don't do. And
say that again, because that was powerful.
Yeah. So 1 is developing self-awareness of what triggers you. 2 is getting good at catching yourself at the moment you're being triggered or just before you get triggered. And 3 is having an alternative behavior to replace
it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm actively, I've been saying it right now. I've been very open about it. I'm actively working on responding rather than reacting.
Yes.
Because I've made some mistakes, and there one time when I fired off an email that was awful. Yeah. And that I should not have fired off. And the second I hit send, before I even hit send, I knew I shouldn't hit send, but I did anyway. And then I spent weeks digging myself out of the hole, and I may never fully dig out of that hole. And there's thousands of examples of that I've done because I operate on emotion,
sure,
which is usually a really good thing for me, except for when it's not. And when it's not, it's just as extremely bad as it is good.
Yeah.
So, but that's that's the piece I've been missing, is that replace it.
Yeah. And if you know what your triggers are, you can come up with those alternative behaviors. Give you an example. Let's go to just listening, right? This is something everyone can do the minute that they listen to this podcast. They can turn around and do this. If you have a habit that interrupts your listening, for example, the more common ones are thinking of questions to ask, judging the other person mentally. It might be cutting people off and finishing their sentences. If you have any of those kind of habits, right? When I teach the fundamentals of listening, I literally say, okay, once you realize you have the habit, you catch yourself doing it, just turn around and practice fundamentals of listening. 3 things. 1 is pick up on the words that people say. 2 is pick up the gestures. And 3, pick up the tone of voice. And pick up everything as if you'd have to repeat it back to them. So if I'm with you right now and you start to veer off and fake attention, and then you're like, holy crap, I'm faking attention, you could stop and say, okay, right now I'm going to listen to Michael. I'm going to pick up every tone he says, every gesture he uses, and every word as if I needed to respond back to them. And when you do that, what it does is slows your brain down, and suddenly the habit starts happening less and less because you've given yourself an alternative.
Right.
Another thing you could do is pick up the key word from every sentence they say, and you have to use the key word in a response back to them. So at the same time, you're proving you heard them because you're using some of the key words, but you're also making your brain focus, because if you miss the key word, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, you're almost forcing active listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you do that all day, you'll be exhausted. Right. But in the moments that count,
when you're getting triggered,
yeah, you need to be able to do it. And that in itself will give you an opportunity to shut down the voice, shut down whatever the habit is, and get you back in the game.
And there's probably a whole podcast episode on this, so we don't have to, unpack it too much. But you've touched a few times on these outside influences on people and leaders and non-leaders in organizations and whatever it might be, of, past traumas coming in or home life or whatever. And I just think that that's worth noting, that we all deal with other stuff.
Yes.
And, the CEO does, and so does the intern. Yep. And I don't know. I think that as human beings, if we're aware of that, it might give us a little bit more empathy, a little more patience, some compassion, of like understanding that, this is important. And today it's about this thing, but we all brought these other things to the table, whether we wanted to or not. I just think that's a powerful observation that you mentioned that didn't sink in for me until just now, that, because sometimes, I don't know, somebody will be actively dealing with something or had the bad day yesterday. Yeah. But we're all bringing all of ourselves to the table. And I just think being aware of that is a good thing, so we can be a little more patient.
And I teach a lot on the on managing the people side of change, and a big piece of understanding the emotional reactions you get out of people is the emotional brain short circuits the rational thinking brain. When you get into survival mode, crap comes out of your mouth and you don't even know you're doing it, right? It's just the emotions reacting.
And sometimes business feels like survival mode, by the way.
Yeah. Well, particularly in the exponentially changing environment, right? So everyone's going to be a little more stressed with that much change. And everyone responds to change differently. And there's a natural process that we have to go through mentally. You know, when you look at change, in the beginning of any change, you know, a lot of times there could be some denial. You could be like, yeah, that's not really going to happen or whatever. And then when the change starts kicking in, if you're not excited about it, you could have active resistance. And then eventually you get to this point where the old way of doing things isn't in place, is not gone yet. And the new way of doing things isn't in place yet.
It's kind of the gap, yeah.
And so they call it like the pet of pessimism is what I call it. But it's like this period of chaos where the old way is not in the new ways. And that could be active resistance. You can get all kinds of emotional reactions. People will start to use that as, see, look, the new change isn't going to work. No, the new change isn't in place yet, right? So you need to manage people's emotions through those changes. That starts, by the way, by getting them understanding the reason for the change and getting them on board with it before you make a single change. And when you do that, it helps people emotionally go in thinking this is going to be a good thing. It may be difficult, but I'm ready for it, as opposed to just resisting it because you didn't give them enough to help them through it.
Which comes back to knowing your audience and how you communicate with them to make sure the message is received properly. Love it.
My favorite change model it's called the ADKAR model, and it stands for awareness, desire, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so you think about it, what most people do is they get right to okay, change is coming. We're going to give them knowledge. We're going to teach them how to do it, and then we're going to reinforce it. But they miss the whole first two steps, which is make them aware of why the change is necessary, how the customer will benefit from it, how you will benefit from it, and then get them on board with it. Give them the benefits of the change, how they personally will benefit. There may be things that are hard, but you're going to benefit, and it's going to allow us to meet our customers better. It'll allow us to make more money, which allows us to do more investment in whatever you do. If you do those two stages really well, before you even think about implementing anything, people come in the door excited and ready, and they absorb more in the knowledge stage, and then they get able faster, the ability faster. But more often than not, when you look at the changes that didn't go well, all the mergers, 50% of all mergers fail.
Really?
They fail to meet the financial goal they originally set out to be. Some of them fail completely. Some of them just don't make what they thought they were going to. Inevitably, it comes down to they didn't manage those first two stages well and get people on board. Because if people are actively resisting, you're going to cause more period of chaos. Whereas if they're already on board, they're looking to make it go through faster.
Wow.
So
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
You wrote down some 10 lessons in leadership that you've learned. And if you don't mind, I'd love to, if you entertain me or humor me, I'd love to read a few of them to you. And then I want you to unpack them.
Sure.
I want to hear the story behind it and give me a little bit of depth behind it.
Yeah. And for context, these are things over my career, I've gotten really valuable lessons some from other people and some from my own experiences. But I don't want other people to make the same mistakes I did, and I want them to learn from it. So that's why I put these together.
So when you tell me the stove's hot, I should just trust you? I don't need to touch it?
Yeah, you don't want to touch it.
Fair enough. First one is, if you want to improve your relationship with anyone, just let go of trying to change the other person.
Yeah. It's such a simple concept, and we don't do it.
If you want your relationship to improve with anyone, forget about trying to change them.
Yeah. And so let me give you some context. And this goes back to the story. I had a leader years ago, Charlie, who, and he's no longer with us, but by the time he was turbo results driven, right? He didn't filter anything he said. And he would just get in your face about it. And in this particular case, I was putting together training. We had to deliver it internally before we delivered it to the client. He would get right in my face and say, "Oh, that was terrible. I don't know what you were thinking." And he'd do all these things. And I was a people person. And I like people to say things nice to me and unpack it. And so what Charlie, he kept being blunt in front of the whole team. And I kept getting more and more angry. And of course, as a people person, I didn't want conflict. So I put this all inside me until it was built up. And finally, I had to go confront him, And when I did finally confront him, I said, "Charlie, I have a problem with the way you're giving feedback." And I did it nicer than that because people person always finds the nicest way to say it. And he said, after I went through this long thing and I really thought it out, I tried to make it very thoughtful. He says, "You know what your problem is?" And I'm thinking, "My problem? You're the one with the problem." And he says, "No, your problem is you take what I say personal." And I said, "It is personal." He's like, "It's not personal." He said, "The only difference between you and me is I say what I feel and you filter what you say." And I stopped and I thought about that. And the reality was, as a people person, I do filter what I say, I may try to make it nice, and he just says it without filtering.
Right.
So if he and I were looking at the same training when we both thought it sucked, he's going to say that training sucked, and I'm going to say, I see an opportunity for improvement. So and it was I already taught personality types at this point, but I had this guy teaching me a lesson about myself that I needed to learn. Long story short, Charlie became one of the leaders I learned more from in my entire career, and the only thing that changed was I started listening to his feedback differently. I stopped taking it personal and started listening to the intent behind it, and I learned a ton from him.
So the way that it improved your relationship with Charlie was instead of asking him to change, you adapted to the way you received his messaging.
Correct. I would go into it thinking he's going to be blunt. I need to let go of that and just listen to the intent behind the message.
Right.
And that's what I did, which, by the way, he did try. Like one time I was telling a story and it went on for a while. And I said, to make a long story short, he said, it's too late for that. But don't take that personal.
I like Charlie.
So, I liked him too. So in any case, he did at times, he would say, don't take this personal,
he would preface it at least a little.
But if you own your own emotional response and learn what triggers you, you can prevent yourself from even having the response in the first place.
Which is you have so much more control over than trying to change the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I came to realize that I was overly sensitive as a people person, and I needed to work on that as well.
Yeah.
Because I lead with that all the time, and I expect everyone else to be just like me. And if everyone else was just like me, our team would not produce nearly as good a result.
It's so funny you say that. So we were talking off camera. I've got a business partner, and she is brilliant. She is as different as me as they come. Mm-hmm. And there was a long time there where I struggled with wanting her to be more like me. And then I finally realized I had this clarity moment. That's the last thing I want.
Yeah.
That would be, gosh, two of me would be a nightmare. So understanding, not asking, my partner to change, and the fact that we're a partner for a reason. She's got these amazing talents that I don't have a clue, I can't even touch, I can't even come near, has made us closer.
Yeah.
What a great takeaway.
Well, and one last thing on that is that no team, the more diverse your team is, without question, the better results you're going to get.
Right.
It's been proven thousands of studies, right? Diverse teams outproduce teams that are not diverse in all areas of diversity, right? You need the more diverse backgrounds people have, the more they bring new, different ideas to the table. And when you have a team of people that are just like you, because you hire people that are also like you,
right,
you're not going to produce as good as a result.
Right. Yeah. If you want to improve your relationship with anyone, just let go of trying to change the other person.
Yep.
I love it.
That's my number one most important thing I've learned in my career.
Your development is your responsibility. Create opportunities to develop. Don't wait for others to do it for you.
Yeah, and that particular one goes back to, so at the University of Utah, I taught people putting together elevator pitches, right? And I took a job with a company, and I wanted to do strategic planning, but it was not part of my job description. And no one was inviting me to do that. They didn't even know that was a strength I had in my background. So I took my knowledge from, I was like, well, if I could teach my employees my students to put together elevator pitches, I should put one together for this one executive. I knew the executive's name. I just started with a company, had been there a week or two. I had not met him yet. He was the COO. And I put together a pitch customized for him on why he should use me to do strategic planning for him. So I saw him in the hallway, and I had it all pre-planned, right, in my head, because I wanted this opportunity to develop, And I walked up to him and I said, hey, nice to meet you. My name's Michael DeLisser. And I went through and I said, look, when I do strategic planning, it allows you to be a participant. I manage the process. All you have to do is show up. You'll have better results going into it because I'll collect information from your team in advance, and I give them all the pitch and everything. And the pitch lasts for 30 seconds to a minute. And he says, okay, thanks. He didn't say anything. And a couple days go by, and I never heard anything. And then I get this phone call from his bosses, who's the regional COO. This is a company with 50,000 employees in the region.
Wow.
And his regional CEO is asking me to go to his office. I didn't even know the other guy was there, but I'm like, I've never even met this CEO of this region of 50,000 people, and I'm walking to his office having no idea why. And the other guy's there with me in the room. He's like, yeah, this is the guy I was telling you about. And he grills me a couple things. He said, okay, cool. So next week we have our strategic planning session. And here's what I want you to do. And I was like, what? Talk about moment of panic, right? Because now it's like, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, another lesson. No, I'm kidding.
But long story short, I did it. I delivered it. It went very well. And then midway through that session that was going really well, he pulls in the worldwide CEO. This is a company of 150,000. I've never met him yet either. And this is during a break. He pulls me in. He's like, this is the guy I was telling you about. You got to use him. And next thing you know, I'm doing it for the worldwide CEO.
Wow.
And I was like, boom, just blew my brain. And it all started with me taking control of trying to create a situation for myself.
Yeah.
And so anyone out there that's sitting in a job who's thinking, I want opportunities and they're not coming, you cannot sit there and wait for your boss to come to you. I mean, with all the changes going on, they're getting pulled in 10 different directions. They probably don't even know that you feel this way.
Right.
You have to go to them and say, look, I have these passions, I have these skills, this is what I really want to do. I see this opportunity over here. Can I be part of it? Volunteering for things. Even say, can you keep your eyes open for these things? But you have to make that aware and you have to be persistent and create those opportunities, because if you don't own your own development, then no one else is going to do it.
I love that. Yeah. Your development is your responsibility.
Yep.
Create opportunities to develop. Don't wait for others to do it for you. That's brilliant. Okay, you ready for this one?
Yeah, bring it on.
Good and bad don't exist in nature. It is just a complete human construct. You get to choose how you define your career and your life experiences. I'm going to read it one more time. Good and bad don't exist in nature. It's a human construct. You get to choose how you define your career and life experiences. Ooh, I like that one.
So let me tell you where that started. This was my undergraduate interpersonal communication class I mentioned before. The example that the professor gave was, look, when there's a drought in Africa, the lions and the animals, they don't sit there and say, oh, crap, this sucks, because they can't control it. They just conserve their energy. They find a shady spot. And they adapt and wait for the conditions to change, right? Or do whatever they can to survive. But none of them are sitting there saying this is bad. It's just the way it is, right? And so the professor was kind of driving home the point that good and bad is a completely human concept. There isn't an animal in the world that thinks good or bad. They just deal with the situation. And so that means we have a choice. We get to choose whether we see a situation or good as bad. And you can go through your life and probably think of a dozen things that at the time it happened, you thought they were really bad, but later it turned into something better. I mean, I've been laid off 3 or 4 times in my career. The next job, and a couple of those turned out to be way better than the one I was in before, right? So you have to make a split decision. I literally say this to myself. Whenever something happens and my initial reaction, it's bad, I just say to myself, it's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. So what am I going to do to turn it into a good? So we get to make that choice in our brains, and it's not bad once you label it bad, then your body follows.
Yeah, now it's
bad. The stress comes with it. But once you stop and say, how can I turn this into an opportunity? It's the equivalent of doing like a SWOT analysis, right? Opportunities, threats, and as you do that, you have to stop and say to yourself, every single thing in your threat will create an opportunity for you if you turn and make it that way.
Right. Yeah, and what a great just life perspective. There's not good or bad is a human construct. I love that. It just is what it is.
And we spend so much time creating these bad stories in our head about, oh, this sucks. I'm not getting the chance to do what I want at work, or I'm not doing this, whatever. Okay, do something about it, but don't sit there and just be mad about it.
Right.
Do what's in your, there's another concept I teach all the time, 3 rings of control. The middle one is control. The next outer ring, 3 concentric circles, if you can imagine that. Middle one is control. The next one is influence, and the outside one is no control, right? So if you have no control over something like the weather, whether someone likes you or whatever, you can't control that. So you have to let go of those things.
Yeah.
You can control your own attitudes and your reactions to things. You can influence others to help make those things happen, but you can't sit there and be upset about something you can't control, or you can turn it into a way to influence it. If you're upset with the political environment, get involved.
Right.
And do whatever you need to. That's your way of influencing rather than just feeling like you're out of control.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Good or bad doesn't exist in nature. It is a human construct. Love it. All right. Any feedback is good feedback if you choose to do something with it to help you improve or grow. All feedback is good feedback as long as you choose to do something with it to help you improve or grow.
Okay. So this one probably goes back to my Charlie days, and the initial story.
Blunt feedback.
Yeah, the blunt feedback. But reality is we get all upset, and which, by the way, a lot more people come out of when they get into the workforce, they've never gotten negative feedback before. There's a lot of parents that are trying to be very constructive in the way it raises their kids.
Gentle parenting.
Yes. And so the first time in their life they're hearing, negative feedback and they're reacting to it because they haven't. But the truth of the matter is, and actually the podcast we were talking about earlier, what was the name of I can't think, one of the podcasts you were in, the person you were speaking to talked about how, I lost my train of thought now. What was the quote again?
All feedback is good feedback.
Oh yeah. So she was talking about how you can take negative things and turn them into positive. I can't remember the specifics about it, but the long and short of it is, what she said was you learn more from your mistakes and your failures than you do from that's what I was trying to remember, from your successes. And so, and that's true. Every athlete that's ever, there's stories about all these different athletes that have gone through the same thing. You have to fail a number of times and learn from those. And so that's just one of the key things you have to learn in life is that if you get feedback that tells you that you didn't do well on something, you could sit there and sulk, or you could see it as bad, or you could stop and say, oh, this is a great opportunity to take that feedback and turn it into some way for me to grow or improve.
Right. But the difference there is that if you take action on it, if you let it improve you.
Yes.
That's the caveat.
Yeah.
All feedback is good feedback as long as you let yourself improve from it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the Charlie example I gave earlier, I was taking it personal and not even hearing the opportunity.
Missing the feedback even.
Right. But when I started listening to him, I was like, holy crap, this guy's right. I am giving too much information and I am doing this and I am doing that. And I didn't hear that before.
Right.
So it allowed me to improve. And that made me realize I need to listen to this guy more, even though I don't like the way it's coming out of his mouth.
And it's also probably worth mentioning that anybody who's willing to give you feedback probably has good intentions. Probably.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, obviously 100 variables, but usually if somebody's giving you feedback, because it's uncomfortable to give feedback too.
Yes.
Especially constructive feedback, room for improvement type feedback. So I think having that kind of caveat to it too, that first of all, if you're getting feedback in general, it's probably coming from a place of, somebody who means well, probably, which means that it could be good feedback if you let it improve you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that.
The thing my dad used to teach in workshops all the time, he would say all feedback is a gift. You just have to decide what you're going to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right. Leadership is not defined by your job title or the organizational chart. It is defined by your behavior and the results you create. So leadership's not a job title. It's not where you are on the organizational chart. It's your behavior and the results you create. Tell me more about that.
Well, a lot of times when I do leadership development training, I'll have individual contributors in there that are, high potential people. And the first thing they'll say out of their mouth is, well, I'm not a leader. And I'll just cut them off and be like, no, you are a leader. I'm like, you're a leader and tell me what your job is and we'll talk about it. But more often than not, we are all leading in some regard, no matter what job we are. We have an expertise that nobody else has. And it's a mindset more than anything else. And this goes back to what you were saying, how do you get your employees engaged? But if you get them believing that their ideas are valued and that they have the right to step forward and call out something and bring up their ideas, and they believe that you're going to take those ideas seriously, you're opening the door for them all to be leaders, right? And the example I gave at the talk I gave last week at the small business conference, I talked about a company that had a janitor who they had a $100,000 plus problem that, they had a quality problem that was happening over and over. There was a janitor that pulled aside one of the people on my consulting team and said, hey, if you're working on that problem, I know what the problem is and I know how to solve it. It was a quality issue. And we said, well, you should tell your executive team. He's like, no, I'm not talking to the executive team. I'm just a janitor. They don't want to hear my opinion, But it turned out the idea for fixing the problem was in the company the whole time, but nobody asked the janitor's opinion. Right? If they had given an environment where he felt like his ideas were going to be valued and that he was invited to the table to help solve this quality issue with their product, he would have stepped forward and said, I can tell you what's happening. In a nutshell, people were throwing trash in with the recycled product and nobody knew that. And he saw it because he was the janitor and he moved it, right? But it was just an early lesson I got in my career from recognizing that you have to have everyone in your company feeling like they can lead in solving any problem. And once you do that, you will bring out the natural leader in them regardless of their title.
There was a time very recently that we were, discussing an approach to something, and it almost got argumentative. It didn't, but it flirted with, and I walked away from it a little bit actually excited because I was like, how great that the other members of the team felt comfortable enough to voice their opinions and to push back a little bit and say, I don't know, Ben, if we should, have you thought about it this way or whatever? And, we haven't perfected our communication styles yet.
Sure.
But it was there, and you could tell that there was, you could tell that everybody wanted the outcome to be positive. That everybody had the same, we all wanted the same thing, different opinions of how to get there. And I left the table thinking how cool that was, that, people felt like they could actually stand up and say, we're not going to do this, or we got to do it this way. If we're going to do it, it should look like that. Which at first, though, speaking of working on responding rather than reacting, at first you're like, no, you get a little flustered and a little bit frustrated. And then an hour later, you're like, actually, that was great. And I'm so glad that, people are willing to speak up. I do think it's interesting, especially if you start talking about it from like a large corporate context, the complexities in who gets credit for ideas and now, the whole politics of corporate. But I do think that probably has applications on smaller, like interdepartmental or whatever it might be from a corporate perspective. Because I think there's always kind of that, or has a tendency to sort of be that, I don't want to bring it up and give so-and-so was going to get credit, for my idea. But now that I'm saying that out loud, that probably is the leader's responsibility to make sure that, everybody can get heard and the credits given where credit's due too.
I'm glad you raised that because nothing will kill your relationship with a direct report faster than taking credit for something they did.
Yeah. I mean,
I've seen that.
Leadership 101.
I've seen that multiple times. And I think it comes from a place of leaders not recognizing that when they become the leader, they're not measured by their success. They're measured by their individual team member success.
Yeah.
And if you can raise the deliveries of the team and give them full credit, you're actually doing more for your own career than trying to make it look like you did a great job. Because if your team's delivering, everyone's going to know you did a great job.
Right.
But if you're sitting there trying to take credit or minimizing the role that they played when everyone knows that they were the one that did the work, then you're losing credibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a very sincere thing. So I don't want this to come across as insincere at all. But I find, I take blame for the failures and give credit for the successes.
Yeah.
Because I also genuinely believe it, that if something didn't work, ultimately that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
I could have restructured it. I could have put other people in place. I could have changed timelines. I could, whatever. I had all these things that I could have done. And it's my deal. I learn from it and move on. But when it works, it wasn't me. It works because honestly, most of the time, because I got out of the way enough, because I let my team work their magic, which, I don't know. I think there's some power in that because that creates an environment where successes are shared and failures are somewhat protected.
Yeah.
You're not at risk here. If this doesn't work, that's my fault.
Yeah.
If it does work, it's your fault. That's amazing because you did what we got it done that way. And I hope that creates kind of an empowering environment, where you can take a chance and know that if it doesn't work out, you're not, your neck's not on the line. There's all these other variables. So anyway, it's just an interesting way to think about it.
You're bringing up something my father, and he wrote a book called Be Your Own Executive Coach, right? And this was 30 plus years ago. But in that book, he emphasizes the importance of being 100% responsible. That was his thing. It's like no matter what happens in a communication, you need to be 100% responsible. Now,
it's like the ownership mindset.
Well, yeah, it is a mindset. But his mindset was basically when anything goes wrong in an interaction, the first question you should be asking yourself is, what could I have done differently that may have prevented that?
What a powerful question.
Yeah. And if you ask that question first, it helps stop you from blaming the other person and then having that spiral into an argument. So if you go in with that mindset of and there will be times where the other person, there wasn't anything else you could do. But if you go in with that mindset, it'll help you learn from it no matter what, and potentially keep it from spiraling into a worse argument.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much because first of all, I know how busy you are. So one, I want to thank you for the time because I know how valuable our time is.
Sure.
But second, I want to thank you for the knowledge and for, letting me bend your ear and for sharing some knowledge with me and, our listeners and all of that. But third, I want to thank you for leading by example and for making the impact that you're making on people and leaders and organizations and all of these things. I just think it's important that you hear how important this stuff is because there's so many of us that want it, that are trying our hardest, but need these little tips and tricks and, the coaching and the advice. And it matters because at the end of the day, we're working with people and people matter. And I just think that your perspective and your insights are valuable so far beyond business and organization and things like that. And so that's really what I want to thank you for. And so thank you so much because this has been an awesome conversation. I've learned more than I can even describe and just want you to know how much I appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I have an absolute passion for helping other people be better at whatever they do. More often than not, that's leadership development. Sometimes it's communication skills. But for me, having any opportunity like this to just go out and share any lesson I learned from mistakes others made, from my own mistakes. I want to do that because we all can learn from each other, in the process, and we all become better communicators and better leaders as a result of that.
Yeah, and the world needs more of it. Which, by the way, just before we wrap, I have a gift for you.
Oh.
This is my 45th episode, I think.
Sweet.
And for the first time ever, I forgot it. It's over there, but I'm going to stay on camera. So
okay.
I have an Inspire by Example shirt for you, which is basically just represents, keep living the life that you're living because it's inspiring and you are inspiring by example. So thanks for getting the word out. And I know that, that you like doing it, but I also have a gift. I got to make sure to mention that you are going to get one. It's just not here right now.
Yeah, no worries.
So anyway.
No worries. I'm not here for the gift. I'm here for the conversation and
but
the
it's
opportunity.
A cool shirt. You got to rock it now.
Cool. I'll wear it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.